I'm going to catch the thread here. This is the Presidential Motorcade Schematic Listing by Todd Wayne Vaughn. Version 9, published in 1993, and I found it somewhere online. I don't remember where. Possibly the Harold Weisberg Archive. And this is a very useful piece of work by Mr. Vaughn. It describes, it lists all of the vehicles and the occupants of the vehicles in JFK's motorcade on the day that he was assassinated. And going to this, the forward mid-motorcade motorcycles, as he describes them. These are two motorcycles who were more or less riding behind the last press car in the motorcade, a few cars back from the president. And he has these two listed as H.B. McLain and Marion Baker. And he, in notes, under where I have the underlining, he says that Baker, that's the motorcyclist on the right, number 2, Baker mistakenly identifies McLain as L.W. Williams in his Warren Commission testimony. I find this to be incredible, meaning I find it to be not credible that Marion Baker didn't know who was riding next to him in the motorcade on the day that the president was assassinated. I do not believe it. And yet Mr. Vaughn states it here as a simple fact, and he doesn't say how he knows it's a fact. Now, he calls this other motorcycle officer L.W. Williams. Baker actually identified him as J.W. Williams. So Vaughn himself has made a mistake here. But I find it not credible that Marion Baker didn't know who was riding beside him on the day that the president was shot. So I have to follow this thread. This is a photograph of these two motorcycle officers in the motorcade from a Dallas Times Herald, I believe. And on the right is Marion Baker. And on the left is the motorcycle officer who I must identify, who Baker said was J.W. Williams. So they're riding together. They're not always this close together, but they're basically riding behind the last press car there. Those are the photographers in the press car sitting up on the back, sitting high in the back seat so they can have a good view to take photographs. And according to Todd Vaughn, Marion Baker mistakenly identified that guy to his left. And I think that is not credible. I think Marion Baker must have known who it was. And I don't think he lied about it. I think Marion Baker correctly identified that as J.W. Williams. But Todd Vaughn says that it is H.B. McLain. And this is from Marion Baker's Warren Commission testimony. Senator Cooper asks, were there any officers that you saw near the school book depository when you went in? Baker is the officer who ran into the building after the shots were fired. And that's why Cooper asks him that. Baker responds, there was an officer working traffic on that corner, and Officer J.W. Williams was. And Baker is interrupted by Allen Dulles, the former director of the CIA, whom JFK had fired. And Dulles seems to not want Baker to talk about J.W. Williams. And he interrupts and says, by that corner, you mean the corner of Elm and Houston? Now, this is a stupid question coming from a not stupid man. Of course, the corner where the building is the corner of Elm and Houston. And Allen Dulles knows damn well that's the corner. And yet he stops Baker when Baker starts talking about J.W. Williams to ask a question that everybody already knows the answer to. And Baker says, that is right, sir. And then he continues about J.W. Williams. J.W. Williams, who was a motorcycle officer, was, I thought, over on the left-hand side of me, and he was right with me. But as I ran in this building, I found out that I was by myself. I didn't know where anybody went. Now, whether or not J.W. Williams was actually there at the time that Baker is talking about, that is, when he was at the Texas School Book Depository building, I don't know. But I think this shows that Baker believed that the officer riding on his left was J.W. Williams. And that's the same interpretation Todd Vaughn took from it when he said that he was mistaken. And Senator Cooper says, "Did you later see J.W. Williams, Officer Williams?" "Yes, sir. He stated that when the motorcade left with the president and they immediately went code 3 to Parkland, why, he was up there with him being the president, and we went up there with him. And I later saw him out there at Parkland." So it seems to be absolutely clear in Marion Baker's mind who he's talking about. And who he's talking about is J.W. Williams, the motorcycle officer who was riding on his left in the motorcade. However, when we look at this document, which says daily assignments for solo motors and select, I don't know what it says there, equipment men. Well, here it gives the list of the motorcyclists, their names, their call numbers for the radio, and the equipment number of the motorcycles they're riding. And here it says that H.B. McLain is riding motorcycle 352, and that J.W. Williams is riding motorcycle 354. And if we go to the photograph, the motorcyclist to the left of Marion Baker is riding motorcycle number 352, as you can see on the license plate. So it would seem that Marion Baker is mistaken, that H.B. McLain is the officer to his left. And as I said before, I find that not credible. What this tells me is that J.W. Williams is riding the motorcycle that the paperwork says was assigned to H.B. McLain. So we have Alan Dulles not wanting Baker to talk about Williams, and the paperwork saying that Williams is H.B. McLain. I think the paperwork and Alan Dulles are both involved in a conspiracy to hide the fact that this is actually J.W. Williams and not H.B. McLain. H.B. McLain himself was never asked anything even touching on this matter until 1978, when he testified to the HSCA, though the questioners were not occupied with this question of who was riding to the left of Marion Baker. They did ask him to identify himself in the photography, and H.B. McLain gave a rather unconvincing answer, I think.
For a gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Dodd.
Well, Sharon, I thought we were moving along here. I just wanted to get clarification on these photographs and your identification. In the first photograph here on the left, you identified the motorcycle closest to us in the picture as being your motorcycle, and you are on it. How do you identify yourself there?
The way I'm sitting on it, just the way I ride it.
When was the last time you saw yourself sitting on a motorcycle?
It's been a while.
But is there anything that distinguishes on the bike itself that you're able to identify as yourself?
No, sir.
How do you ride it? I mean, when you say by the way you ride off to the side, or what is it about the letter, about the picture that distinguishes?
I don't know how to explain that. It's just a characteristic of sitting on it.
Look at the last picture, if the gentleman would continue to yield. Mm-hmm. How do you know that's you?
It's just the way that I'm sitting.
I wonder if you care to describe how you're sitting.
It just comes natural to you.
as only it should, I think.
And you don't identify any other mark on that last photograph as being yourself either, on the motorcycle?
No, sir, I can't tell.
Lots of laughs and giggles there back when our government pretended to investigate stuff. But Congressman Dodd here seems at least to be serious and a little confused here. Unfortunately, I think he did not realize that this was a serious problem. That is, who that motorcycle in the photography is. And I think if Dodd had understood it was a serious problem, he might have pursued it a little further, but he didn't. It was left at that, with this very unconvincing answer from H.B. McLain that he could identify himself in the photography simply by the way he sat on his motorcycle, even though he could not describe how he sat on his motorcycle. I think that's very weird, and I think that H.B. McLain was lying here, that he was not actually this motorcycle officer, and therefore I think Allen Dulles, the Dallas Police Department paperwork, and H.B. McLain are all manipulated by the conspiracy to cover up what really happened. And in this instance, what really happened was J.W. Williams rode beside Marion Baker in the motorcade. And another thing I find interesting is that H.B. McLain is actually identified in the photography by what I think of as official sources. Actually, this is from the Portal to Texas History webpage, but the photograph comes from the 6th Floor Museum. As you can see from this 2021 screen capture, I wasn't able to find it there recently. They changed the availability of their materials online, and when I went last to look for it, it wasn't available anymore. But in 2021 at least, the 6th Floor Museum identified this officer as H.B. McLain, and it's pretty unusual for a lowly patrolman to be so identified in a photograph like this, and I find that interesting. And note in this photograph that this officer clearly is wearing a leather jacket. And clearly the officer who's riding to the left of Marion Baker, whom Baker says is J.W. Williams, and who I say is J.W. Williams, clearly he is not wearing a leather jacket, as you can see that he is wearing his police shirt. So this officer at Parkland Hospital, whom the 6th Floor Museum says is H.B. McLain, cannot be the same officer riding next to Marion Baker. That is, he's not J.W. Williams, but is he H.B. McLain? Well, according to D.L. Jackson, who said he wrote this information down on the night of the assassination, that is, the night after the assassination, according to him, Officer James Taylor accompanied him to escort the hearse with President Kennedy's body in it from Parkland Hospital to Love Field to the airplane. And I'll read this shortly. Some officer walked up and told me they are taking the president out the other door. Come on, he said. I walked outside just as they were putting the casket into the hearse. Someone said, Jackson, a Secret Service agent is looking for you. Sergeant Stave Ellis asked me if I was going to escort the body to Love Field, and I said, I don't know about that. I said, I don't know. About that time, the agent walked up and asked if I had arranged for the escort, and I said, yes, I'm ready to go when you are. Officer James Taylor asked me if I wanted him to go with me, and I said yes, and turned to Sergeant Ellis and told him that Taylor and I were going to make escort to Love Field, and with that we left. So Jackson is saying that he and this officer James Taylor escorted the hearse from Parkland Hospital to Love Field. And we happen to have this photograph which shows that, the beginning of that escort. Jackson is the officer on our left in this photograph. That can be determined in various ways, particularly by the stuff he has behind his windshield in front of his little dashboard there. That's definitely Jackson on the left. So the person on the right is the person that Jackson is identifying as Officer Taylor. And also we have photography of this officer standing at Love Field after the president's body has been put on Air Force One. And this apparently is the same officer that the Sixth Floor Museum identified as H.B. McLain. They're both at Parkland Hospital. They're both wearing a leather jacket. Now, the leather jacket isn't unique. I can identify at least one other officer in the photography who definitely is not the same person we see at Parkland. He's in Dealey Plaza, and he's definitely not the same officer. But it's very unusual. Most motorcycle officers, as can be seen in much of the photography, are not wearing leather jackets. So it's unusual. And both of these officers, Taylor and the one that the Sixth Floor Museum identify as McLain, both of them are wearing a leather jacket. And you can even see that the helmet is slightly askew. Askew, is that the right word? It's not on completely straight. You can see the visor tip is a little to the officer's right instead of being dead center in both photographs. So there's no question in my mind that this is the same officer, and that D.L. Jackson has identified this officer as James Taylor, Officer James Taylor, not the singer, of course. So the official storytellers at the Sixth Floor Museum have misidentified this officer. This is not Officer H.B. McLain. It's Officer James Taylor. And that will be important later in the video. But right now, the thing to keep in mind, or the thing to note, is that the Sixth Floor Museum apparently wants us to think this is H.B. McLain, and it clearly is not the guy in the motorcade, and according to Jackson, it's not even McLain. It's some other guy named Officer Taylor. So these three motorcycle officers are involved with an Assassination Day shenanigans. And it's a little complex. I'm going to try to keep it simple by trying to deal with each one of them separately, rather than trying to fit it into a timeline. This Dallas police document says that J.W. Williams, the first officer I'm dealing with, had been assigned to a three-wheel motorcycle at the Trade Mart on the day of the assassination. I think that's a lie. I think that, well, I don't know, he may have been assigned on paper to that, but I think J.W. Williams was assigned by the conspiracy to ride in the motorcade beside Marion Baker and to ride McLain's motorcycle so that it would appear in the photography that it was McLain, unless you could get a good shot of his face. And I've looked through all the photography, and you don't get a good shot of his face. You can't identify this guy by anything but the number on the motorcycle and by what Marion Baker says, and I believe Marion Baker. So I think this is a cover story here, that he didn't really go to the Trade Mart on a three-wheel motorcycle, that he was actually riding beside Marion Baker in the motorcade, and that he was being a kind of a stand-in dummy for H.B. McLain, who had other things to do. And the only other information I have on Williams is his obituary as it appeared in the Dallas Morning News on June 9th, 2009. Williams, a retired police officer and resident of Garland, Texas, passed away on June 7th, 2009 after a lengthy illness. Jay was born in Potosi, Texas on July 20th, 1928, to Allie Leofa Anderson Williams and Howard H. Williams. Jay served his country in the Army Air Force, which I take to be significant because many other people in the story also served in the Army Air Force or the Air Force or some other branch of the service. Of course, back then, a lot more people used to be in the service or ex-service personnel than today. During World War II and in the Marine Air Force during the Korean War. After completing his military service, Jay joined the Dallas Police Department and retired in 1979. After a brief retirement, Jay was employed by the Dallas County Sheriff's Department, from which he retired in February 1995. And many of the suspicious characters on the Dallas police force did just that. They earned their retirement from the police force to get their pension there, and then they switched over to the Dallas County Sheriff's Department and retired from there. And that's about all I have on Williams. As I said, I think his job was simply to fill in for H.B. McLain and to later deny, if necessary, that he had done so. But apparently, nobody ever asked him anything about anything, as far as I can tell. And I think Williams was playing the role of McLain in the Motorcade because McLain had something to do in Dealey Plaza that the conspiracy planners thought was important enough that they didn't want to have him riding in the motorcade and perhaps risk injury or an accident or something. They wanted to make sure he was on the scene in Dealey Plaza, ready to do what they needed him to do. And one of the reasons I think he was in Dealey Plaza is this FBI report of an interview with a witness named Garland Slack, who was in Dealey Plaza when the president was shot. And looking at the body of this report, it says in here, Officer H.B. Randall picked up a frightened young colored boy who was hiding under a monument. Which boy was supposed to have actually witnessed the shooting of the president? Now, there was only one black boy witness to the shooting of the president who made it into the official documents, who was named, and that was Amos Ewens. He was named as Amos Ewens. It's too complicated to explain what this is because we know that Amos Ewens was found by a different officer, not H.B. Randall. And so it's a little confusing, but I don't want to go off on that tangent. What's important to me here is that the officer who Slack said, according to the FBI, picked up this colored boy was H.B. Randall. Well, we don't know that Slack actually said H.B. Randall. We know that's what the FBI said he said, because that's the way the FBI writes their reports. They don't actually quote the witnesses. And this is a list of the entire roster of the Dallas Police Department for November 1963. And there isn't a single Randall on the police force. Not only that, the only police officer who has the initials HB is H.B. McLain. There's no H.B. Randall, so if the HB is right in this report, then they're talking about H.B. McLain, not H.B. Randall. They just made up the name Randall in order to hide the fact that McLain was in Dealey Plaza. So the FBI, presumably Garland Slack knew who it was. He knew who the person was who took the statement from the black boy. Presumably he knew this officer. Presumably he gave the right name, which I say is H.B. McLain. And the FBI knew enough that they didn't want McLain to be known to have been in Dealey Plaza at this time. So they changed the name to Randall, but they kept the HB. That's what I think happened here. And also interesting is that H.B. McLain, later that evening, is at the police station guarding the robbery and homicide bureau office door. And Linnie Mae Randall, that last name Randall, apparently is exchanging some words with H.B. McLain. That's the way it looks to me here. Of course, I don't have the soundtrack, but that's what it looks like. And I've identified Linnie Mae Randall there. I know she went to the police station with her brother, Buell Wesley Frazier, and there are photographs of her. And I've inserted two of those photographs here. One is when she was much older, of course, but it shows the hairstyle. And she's a short woman, too. And so it all fits. And that looks like her to me. So it looks to me like H.B. McLain has some sort of a relationship with Linnie Mae Randall. And I find it interesting, therefore, that the FBI has changed his name to Randall. Because whoever in the FBI changed that name knew that H.B. McLain had some kind of a relationship with the Randalls. That's the way I interpret this, considering that there is no police officer by the name of Randall, and the only one that has HB as initials is H.B. McLain. And that's the way I interpret this. I think this means that H.B. McLain was in Dealey Plaza, and that he picked up a young, frightened black boy who witnessed the shooting of the president. And there's an explanation for why that's not Amos Ewens, too, but I'm not going to get into that in this video. The point here is that H.B. McLain was in Dealey Plaza when the president was assassinated, and that's why J.W. Williams is pretending to be H.B. McLain in the motorcade, is to give him cover for being in Dealey Plaza. Also, I'll note here that according to the Dallas police documents, J.W. Williams worked the same motorcycle shift as McLain, and there were only 11 officers working that shift, so I'm sure they must have known each other very well. They saw each other every day, and so I don't think it's surprising that the person sitting in for McLain in the motorcade would be someone that he worked with every day. Though it could be just a coincidence, like everything else that happened. So if Williams was a decoy playing McLain in the motorcade, then what was McLain doing that was so important in Dealey Plaza? I guess I have to get to that now. This is a motorcycle officer running towards the Texas School Book Depository building after the shooting. And everybody and his brother thinks that's Marion Baker running in this film. This is from the Darnell film. But everybody and his brother is wrong. That's not Marion Baker running towards the building. And I have to demonstrate that now in order to get to who it really is. And who it really is, of course, is H.B. McLain. But let's first start with the problem of it not being Baker. And this is Warren Commission Exhibit 478, and I have superimposed the relevant testimony onto the exhibit from Marion Baker's testimony. Mr. Bellin says, "Now I show you Exhibit 478, and ask you, if you will, on this exhibit, put an arrow with the letter B to the stoplight. This is the stoplight that Baker said he parked 10 feet east of." And we can see on the exhibit, the photograph, Baker has put his B, what he says is 10 feet east of the stoplight. Talking about this one here, the stoplight from which we measured the distance to the motorcycle. The arrow with the letter B points to the stoplight. Is that correct? That is correct, sir. Now, what Bellin is referring to here is the fact that he and other Warren commissioners went to Dealey Plaza with Officer Baker and reenacted what he did on the day of the assassination. We don't have a film of that. What we have is the testimony here. So what this means is that Bellin and Baker were both in Dealey Plaza, and they went to this stoplight, and Baker, at that stoplight, said that he parked 10 feet east of that stoplight before he ran into the building. And you stopped your motorcycle 10 feet to the east of that stoplight. Is that correct? That is correct, sir. So the meaning here is absolutely clear. Baker says, and he says after having been again in Dealey Plaza with Mr. Bellin, that he parked his motorcycle right there where the B is, which is 10 feet east of that stoplight pole. And this is a frame from the Mal Couch film. And I'm using a frame from this film because it shows the motorcycle better. Because in the Darnell film, where we see the officer running, coincidentally, the door of the car there is partially blocking the view of the motorcycle. So it's easier to see the motorcycle in the Couch film, and that's why I'm using it. And circled in yellow is the pole that holds up the lights, which I am pointing to with the yellow arrow. That's the pole that Baker said he parked 10 feet east of. Yet the motorcycle officer is running from this motorcycle where the blue arrow is, and that is not 10 feet east of the light pole. That's probably about 30 to 40 feet south of the light pole. Now, the idiots in the shills want you to think Baker is mistaken about where he parked his motorcycle. That's what they will always say when a witness disagrees with their wacky theories. They will say, well, the witness is mistaken. And that's all they can do, because Baker says specifically that he parked 10 feet east of that light pole, and the only way they can counter that is to say he's mistaken. But of course he's not mistaken. Now maybe he parked 11 feet east of it, maybe he parked 9 feet east of it, maybe he was slightly southeast of it. I mean, it doesn't mean he's exactly right, but he's pretty close to where he parked, obviously, because he was there, and the idiots and shills were not there. And you can't make this motorcycle anywhere near 10 feet east of that light pole. This is about 30 to 40 feet south of it. And so that's not Marion Baker's motorcycle. And the running officer is running from that motorcycle. So that's not Marion Baker running in the Darnell film. And this makes sense that it's a different officer, that it's not Baker, when you consider this part of Baker's testimony where he says, "That is right, sir. J.W. Williams, who was a motorcycle officer, was, I thought, over on the left-hand side of me." And this refers, as I said before, to Baker believing that Williams was his partner in the motorcade on the other side of the street. And then he says, and he was right with me. So he thought this other officer was J.W. Williams. But as I ran in the building, I found out that I was by myself. I didn't know where anybody went. So what this means is, I think, that Baker saw this other officer running into the building. He assumed it was the guy that had been riding beside him, J.W. Williams, even though it wasn't. But he saw this other guy running into the building while he was still on his motorcycle. And then he parked his motorcycle, got off it, and ran into the building himself. And he assumed that that other officer, whom he thought was J.W. Williams, was going to be inside the building already because he had seen him running towards the building. But when he got into the building, he found out he was by himself. He didn't know where anybody went. So what we can infer from this is that that other officer wasn't Baker and that he did not run into the building. Otherwise, Baker would have seen him when he ran into the building himself. And the Darnell clip here actually provides evidence that Baker is still on his motorcycle and he's approaching that light pole that he said he parked 10 feet east of. And we can see right here where the cowboy man, as I call him, comes to a complete stop, even though he's walking towards the building, and he stops because the motorcycle that Baker is riding is going to cross his path and go towards that light pole. So he sees Baker coming, and he stops so that the motorcycle can pass in front of him. And probably the reason that Darnell is panning his camera in this direction, he might be following the motorcycle officer, but he probably hears that approaching motorcycle too, and he pans his camera over there towards the motorcycle. But we don't see the motorcycle. What we see is this guy in the suit looking towards the building, walking in front of the camera. It's as if Darnell heard that guy walking and panned over to him and caught the scene of him approaching the building. Of course, that's not what really happened. I've come to the conclusion that this guy has been photographically inserted into the film, that the Darnell film has been edited to put this walking man into the film, and the reason they did that was to hide the front of Baker's motorcycle as it approaches the light pole. And that explains why that guy is there. He was inserted to hide Baker's motorcycle. And I put this graphic together to illustrate the fact that people heard this motorcycle, Baker's motorcycle, approaching, and they turned to look. I've already gone over a cowboy man in the left part of the graphic there. He turned to look at the approaching motorcycle. But there's a girl there further back towards the building who also turned to look at this approaching motorcycle. Motorcycles are loud, and you can hear them approaching, and you tend to turn to look to them. So this is evidence that there was a motorcycle approaching where the cameraman, Darnell, cowboy man, and this girl, all three of them, turned to where they heard the motorcycle approaching. And it was hidden by the walking man there being placed into the film, because somebody was going over all of the photography, and somebody who knew what happened and knew it had to be hidden, and was going through the photography to make sure they hid whatever needed to be hidden. So the point here is that this running motorcycle officer is not Marion Baker, that the cover-up knew that they wanted to hide the identity of this motorcycle officer, so they arranged things so that we would naturally think it's Marion Baker. But it's not Marion Baker. It's another motorcycle officer. And that's why I say it's McLain. Because McLain, his location was being hidden too, because somebody else was impersonating him in the motorcade, and he was seen in Dealey Plaza by Garland Slack, and the FBI hid the fact that that was McLain by changing his name to Randall, as I have already explained. So, having no other reason to think it's any other motorcycle officer, I can only conclude that this running officer is H.B. McLain, and that he's doing something involving the conspiracy, because that's why they're hiding his identity. Otherwise, we would know what he did, what this other officer did. And that's why they have to make us think it's Baker, because we know what Baker did. So if we think that's Baker, there's no problem. But it's not Baker. It's H.B. McLain, and he's doing something involving the murder of the president. Many people, even people who think this officer is Baker, think that this officer is not running into the building, but rather is running past the steps towards the east side of the building. That is, they think this officer, based upon his running trajectory, is not running to the steps, but is running past the steps. But the way this film exists, in its current form anyway, you can't be sure of that, because the camera pans away and the officer is out of frame, at the very moment that he would begin to go up the steps, if that's what he was doing. I think these people are right. I think this officer did not run to the steps. And the reason I think that is because these people seem to be right in that the officer's trajectory is going to be past the steps, but also because Marion Baker is not this officer. And Marion Baker said he ran into the building expecting another officer to be in there, but there was no other officer in the building. So I think this officer is not running into the building. He's not running to the steps. He's running past the steps to the east side of the building. Now, there are various reasons to think that the assassins in Dealey Plaza were using portable radios or walkie-talkies. We have a dark-complected man apparently talking on a radio, and we can hear transmissions on the Dallas Channel 1, Dallas Police Channel 1 radio recordings. So I think they were using Dallas Police Channel 1 as their frequency to communicate on, using walkie-talkies. In Dealey Plaza, walkie-talkies are not as high-powered as automobile or motorcycle radios. So combining the lower power with an interference that was created at one of the receiving stations, as I've explained in other videos, would mean that the radio communications in Dealey Plaza would mostly be heard near Dealey Plaza and would not be picked up at a great distance from Dealey Plaza. But also, their plan apparently was that they wouldn't be audible on the recording that they knew was going to be made, but actually it is barely audible and on the recording, especially if you use filtering to clean up the recording. You can hear their transmissions on there. So I have no doubt whatsoever that the assassins in Dealey Plaza were using portable radios, and that therefore, because somebody, at least on the 6th floor and perhaps also on the 7th floor, was involved with this plot, that walkie-talkies were being used in the Texas School Book Depository. And, of course, a rifle was also used there. And I think they needed to be in communication with each other, so they all had radios. So my speculation is that H.B. McLain is running to the east side of the building because somebody is going to hand out a walkie-talkie radio to him, one or two of them, and that's something that he can take away from the scene and not look too suspicious about, because they're police radios, presumably. That is, the assassins in Dealey Plaza are using police-issued walkie-talkies, and so a police officer carrying walkie-talkies to his motorcycle and putting them in the storage compartment on his motorcycle wouldn't look terribly suspicious. And I think that's probably why McLain was in Dealey Plaza at this time, and probably why his presence there was being disguised by J.W. Williams riding his motorcycle, and that McLain was already in Dealey Plaza when the president was shot and went immediately into action at the predetermined time in order to retrieve the walkie-talkies that had been used inside the building. That's my explanation for what McLain was doing there. Now, I think it's possible that this officer, identified by the 6th floor museum at Parkland Hospital, identified as H.B. McLain, I think it's possible that this identification is intentionally incorrect in order to further complicate this situation involving these motorcycle officers. But as I've already explained in this video, that officer apparently was Officer James Taylor, at least according to Officer D.L. Jackson. And what makes this officer at Parkland Hospital so interesting to me, and I'm going to call this officer Officer James H. Taylor, because that's who I think it is. What makes this officer seem so interesting is that he looks like he's the same officer we can see coming out of the Texas Theater when Oswald is arrested. This officer apparently is wearing the same leather jacket, and very specifically, he seems to have the same cleft chin, where the top of the cleft angles or circles out or whatever towards his the left side of his face, the right side from our perspective. I think that's a very distinguishing characteristic there, the way that chin looks. And the fact that he's also wearing a leather jacket with the fluffy collar, which is very unusual in the Dallas Police Department at this time. So I think that's the same officer. But notice, very strangely, I think, the officer is wearing a different helmet at the Texas Theater. He's not even wearing a police helmet. The police helmets have that insignia on it, you can see, that's on the officer at Parkland Hospital. But the guy coming out of the Texas Theater is not wearing a police helmet. So he's wearing the police jacket, but not the police helmet. And if we look at the rest of the photography from the Texas Theater and Oswald's arrest, we can see that this person with the leather jacket and the same cleft chin at the Texas Theater, he's not wearing the police helmet, and he also doesn't have a stripe on his pants, as all of the motorcycle officers have, that you can see in the photography. And he also apparently is not wearing a gun on his right side. Some people, of course, are left-handed. But what this looks like to me is that this person at the Texas Theater is not dressed as a police officer. And yet, in the context of this photograph, you assume he's a police officer. But if he had walked into the theater an hour before, maybe carrying the jacket, or maybe wearing the jacket, he would not look like a police officer. Also, if you look at the officer at the Texas Theater, you can see a little bit of the blue of his shirt. It's a light blue kind of shirt in there. And all of the Dallas police officers at this time have very dark blue shirts. So the guy at the Texas Theater is not actually dressed as a police officer, but he's dressed in such a way that when he comes out in the context of Oswald being arrested, he looks like a police officer. So what I think this means is he entered the theater not wanting to appear to be a police officer. Maybe, as I said, maybe he was carrying the jacket, maybe he was carrying the helmet, and he just looked like some guy who rode his motorcycle to the movie theater. But he comes out as a police officer. This person wearing the helmet did not go unnoticed by the Warren Commission. Mr. Bellin, here questioning Sergeant Hill, because Sergeant Hill is also in this photograph, and he came out of the theater at the time of Oswald's arrest. Mr. Bellin asks Sergeant Hill, "Do you know who this person is with the helmet at the extreme left of the person with the helmet?" Notice Bellin does not identify him as a police officer. I think Mr. Bellin probably was a very sharp man. That's probably why he got the job. And he recognized that this person was not dressed as a police officer, so he didn't call him a police officer. He called him a person with the helmet. And Sergeant Hill says, "I do not recognize him specifically, but just trying to identify that much of him, I would say it could be an officer named L.E. Gray, but I can't make positive identification." And Bellin says, "Okay, Sergeant." So here I think Gerald Hill, who's a very suspicious character in the assassination, and I'm not going to go through all that here, I think Hill knows damn well who that is, and he doesn't want to say who it is. And that's why he can't identify him. He doesn't know who this officer is, which he acknowledges as an officer, even though he's not dressed as an officer. And he named some other motorcycle officer. L.E. Gray was in the motorcade, and then L.E. Gray went to Parkland Hospital. We have photography showing him at Parkland Hospital at a time which... we have photography of him going to Parkland Hospital and showing him there very shortly after the president arrived. And L.E. Gray also has a cleft chin, so that would be a reason why Hill might say that. But it's not the same cleft chin. This is James H. Taylor at the Texas Theater. And of course, Sergeant Gerald Hill knew that, but he pretended that he didn't. And that shows, I think, that an attempt is being made to hide the identity of this officer at the Texas Theater, because if this officer were questioned, he would have to lie about what was going on, and he would have to explain why he's not dressed as a police officer, at least if someone as smart as Mr. Bellin were questioning him. So this means something was going on at the Texas Theater. It was pre-planned, and that James H. Taylor, the motorcycle officer, went in dressed as a civilian, so to speak, not a policeman, so that he could be present at the arrest of Oswald, that the Dallas police, or these Dallas police, knew was going to happen before it happened. So I think that reveals that this is an inside job and that certain members of the Dallas Police Department were involved. This same motorcycle officer can be seen at Parkland Hospital after Oswald's arrest, doing crowd control. And you can see here, if you analyze the helmet, that he is now wearing a police helmet. So I say that he changed into a police helmet before he got to Parkland Hospital. And presumably he's wearing he's definitely wearing the police pants, as we can see in other photography. And we can see here in this film that he is wearing his gun. His automatic pistol is on his right side, and it was not on his right side at the Texas Theater. I still say this is the same person, James H. Taylor, Dallas police officer, and that he was dressed as a civilian, as they call the rest of us, when he was at the Texas Theater, and that he changed back into police clothes on his way to Parkland Hospital. And this is another film of him doing crowd control at Parkland Hospital, and I think it's very revealing, because I think it shows him very obviously being upset, disappointed, upset that he's being filmed here, and he even seems to confer with someone I presume to be a Secret Service agent, though I haven't been able to identify him. And the presumed Secret Service agent is telling him that he's being filmed, as if the Secret Service agent knows that's a bad thing too. And I think if you read the officer's lips here, it looks like he's saying, "I know." That is, that he's already seen the camera. And then this other officer, apparently being aware that Taylor, James H. Taylor, doesn't want to be photographed, he puts himself in front of the camera. So it looks like they're all working together here. And then this other guy, I think he's some press guy, pushes the officer back, sort of, because he wants to get through and talk to the priest, perhaps, or maybe it's because of this ambulance coming by. I don't know. But then the photographer stops filming there and comes back to the police officer, James H. Taylor, and he looks very disappointed again that he's being photographed. And I think the reason is because he was at the Texas Theater at the arrest of Oswald, and he knows that he was photographed there, and so he's concerned that somebody will be able to see that he's the same officer here, and that he will be identified, and then he will be questioned about what he was doing at the Texas Theater and why he wasn't dressed as a policeman at the Texas Theater, and that would threaten to unravel the plot. So I think this created a problem that McLain, I keep calling him McLain because I used to think this officer was McLain because the Sixth Floor Museum identified him as McLain, but he's actually James H. Taylor. And so he's James H. Taylor here, and the presumed Secret Service agent are concerned that he's going to be identified as the officer at the Texas Theater, and that the plot will be unraveled, and that they will all hang for treason and murdering the president. Now, the only information I could find on James H. Taylor is his obituary online. And interestingly, his characteristically cleft chin or dimpled chin is cut out of the photograph that appears on his obituary. But if you click on that picture, you get the entire picture that is not cropped, and you can see his cleft chin right there. Now, the trouble with this is that it dimples up in the wrong direction to be James H. Taylor at Parkland Hospital. But if you do the mirror image, which is a simple thing to do in photography, in traditional photography, all you do is turn the negative around and you can get the mirror image. If you take the mirror image, it matches perfectly. So I view this as a positive identification of the officer at Parkland Hospital in this photograph as James H. Taylor, because his chin matches exactly the photograph provided in his obituary. And reading here from his obituary, James H. Taylor passed away unexpectedly August 17th at his home in Plano of renal failure. James was born in Forney, Texas on July 29, 1931, to James Monroe and Myrtle McCollum Taylor. He proudly served his country in the U.S. Army during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now, if you look at his history during the Cuban Missile Crisis, you have to conclude that he was already working for the Dallas Police Department. So how can he be serving his country in the U.S. Army during the Cuban Missile Crisis? Well, I view this as, and I'm not saying the obituary publishers knew this, but whoever provided the information to them, probably James Taylor himself, or indirectly from James Taylor. I think what this means is that he was working for Army intelligence during the Cuban Missile Crisis when he was working on the assassination. And I think he probably viewed this as serving his country, that he viewed that Kennedy was a threat to the security of the United States and that he had to be eliminated. That's the way I interpret that. He proudly served his country in the U.S. Army during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And one could view, if one wanted to, President Kennedy as the personification, sort of the Cuban Missile Crisis. That is, that his decision was a disaster. Some people thought so anyway, even though I think history has since judged him to have saved the world from nuclear war. People at the time, and probably still people today, think that he caved in and capitulated by agreeing to remove missiles from Turkey in exchange for the Russians removing their missiles from Cuba. But anyway, I think probably James H. Taylor was involved with the assassination because he thought it was the right thing to do for his country. He proudly served his country in the U.S. Army during the Cuban Missile Crisis. James joined the Dallas Police Department in 1955, and of course 1955 was before the Cuban Missile Crisis, so presumably he had been in the Army before that. His greatest dream was to ride a motorcycle for his life's work, and was a motorcycle officer and trainer for 20 years and a hit-and-run investigator for 7 years. Immediately upon retirement in 1982, he joined the Dallas County Sheriff's Department, where several other of the Dallas Police Department conspirators went to work after they retired from the police department, where he served for 13 years. On November 22nd, 1963, he was part of the Motorcade, it says here. And I'll get to what that might... Well, that might refer to him escorting President Kennedy's body to Love Field, I suppose. He might have thought of that as being part of the motorcade. He was part of the motorcade escorting President Kennedy. Well, as far as I know, he was not escorting the living President Kennedy, and was also responsible for crowd control at Parkland Hospital, which I have shown here, and that's consistent with my identification of him as that officer. James was a 32nd degree Mason and a member of the Scottish Rite for over 50 years. Some people think that's significant. He was a true gentleman who was dearly loved and respected and will be sorely missed by his family and all who knew him for his fairness and never-ending supply of jokes. And I think that's enough of that. This is a film taken by the official White House photographer, and you can tell this is pretty near to the beginning, or pretty early at Parkland Hospital, because you see these people walking towards the camera. That's the press just arriving, and that bus in the background is the press bus. And there's a police officer standing on the lawn over there who's wearing a leather jacket. And if you analyze the photography, you can see that this police officer is standing in just about the same spot as this police officer at Parkland Hospital, who the sixth floor identified as H.B. McLain, and who I have identified as James H. Taylor. And since he's wearing a leather jacket in this Atkins film, and he's standing in the same spot, and I conclude it's the same officer, and that is Officer Taylor here in the Atkins film, and that he's standing there very early on in what is happening at Parkland Hospital, just a few minutes after the president arrived. And right near this officer is a three-wheel motorcycle parked in the driveway there. And you can tell it's a three-wheel motorcycle because you can see this black thing on front of it. I don't know what its purpose is, but you look at other three-wheel motorcycles in the photography, and you can see that they have that thing there. So this police officer is standing next to a three-wheel motorcycle, and the implication is that he rode that three-wheel motorcycle to the spot here, that it's his motorcycle. It doesn't prove that it's his motorcycle, but that's the implication to me. And this makes me think that maybe James H. Taylor rode a three-wheel motorcycle to Parkland Hospital, and he arrived there just after the president arrived there. And in other photography, you can see that there is a three-wheel motorcycle at this spot, even though, for some reason, it cannot be seen in the photograph of James Taylor talking to the Secret Service man there, which the Sixth Floor Museum identified as H.B. McLain. The motorcycle is not visible here, either because that guy with the sunglasses, the presumed Secret Service agent, is standing in front of it. Well, I don't know if that's a good explanation, or maybe from this angle you can't see it because of a car there. I don't know about that. But there definitely is a three-wheel motorcycle there on the day of the assassination, even though you can't see it in this photograph. So I hypothesize, based upon the information in this video so far, that J.W. Williams was riding the motorcycle assigned to H.B. McLain, that H.B. McLain was riding the motorcycle assigned to James H. Taylor, and that James H. Taylor was riding the three-wheel motorcycle assigned to J.W. Williams. Now, in this graphic, I don't draw the line to J.W. Williams' motorcycle number from James Taylor because this listing refers to their regular assignment motorcycles for the shift they're going to start working at 4 p.m. And notice that all three of these guys who are switching motorcycles, they all work the same shift. So they all presumably know each other very well, and that would give them the opportunity to be buddies in the conspiracy. But because James Taylor, or not James Taylor, because J.W. Williams, according to this paperwork, was assigned to a three-wheel motorcycle at the Trade Mart, and because I have determined, based upon the photography, that James H. Taylor was riding a three-wheel motorcycle, I think probably that Taylor is riding the Williams motorcycle to which he was assigned for the presidential detail. So, according to my explanation of the evidence, these three guys were switching motorcycles for the assassination events, and that at first James H. Taylor was riding a three-wheel motorcycle. That is, prior to the shooting and through the shooting and for a short while after the shooting, Taylor was riding a three-wheel motorcycle. And McLain is saying here from the Larry Sneed book, you can tell very clearly the difference between the sound of a solo motorcycle that we rode and a three-wheel motorcycle. It's like daylight and dark. The solo engine has kind of a thump to it, chook, 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 while the three-wheeler has more of a thrashing sound, ang, ang, ang. You could hear this all on the tapes, but the people in Washington didn't listen. They were trying to tell us what it was. Now, I don't trust McLain. I think he's one of the conspirators. But here he's rebutting the acoustical evidence theory, which is a stupid theory, which was set up to fail, and he's doing his part by helping it to fail. So I think he's telling the truth here. That is, the motorcycle that provided the interference on Channel 1 was a three-wheel motorcycle. Captain Bowles, James C. Bowles of the Dallas Police Department, became prominent during the HSCA investigation or afterwards when he was rebutting the very silly acoustical evidence theory. And here I've taken an excerpt from his work, which somebody posted online, when he asks the question of himself, was it a two-wheel or a three-wheel motorcycle, referring to the motorcycle that was providing the radio interference on Channel 1 of the Dallas Police radio frequency. And he says, Bowles says, it was a three-wheel motorcycle that was providing the interference. Note, the committee could have and should have used the equipment available to them to analyze the motor sounds in the recording. They would have proved that the chart generated by a three-wheel flathead engine, rather than a Harley-Davidson high-performance overhead 74, matched the chart generated by the motorcycle in the recording. This would have conclusively eliminated McLain as the suspect operator. And at that time, in the 1970s, H.B. McLain was suspected of having the radio, which they said accidentally provided the interference on Channel 1. Well, I think it was intentionally provided, and I think Bowles is right here that it came from a three-wheel motorcycle. And I think that's probably the same three-wheel motorcycle that James H. Taylor was standing nearby. As we can see in this photo, even though we can't see the three-wheel motorcycle in this photo where we can see James H. Taylor's face. But we know that three-wheel motorcycle was there, and I think Taylor rode it to Parkland Hospital, and that before he got to Parkland Hospital, he was intentionally providing the radio interference, which was intended to prevent the communications from the assassins in Dealey Plaza being recorded at the dispatch center. And it did provide information that made it, or interference that made it difficult to hear these transmissions. But if you do a little work, you can hear these transmissions. So I think Taylor, his job during the motorcade was to provide radio interference on Channel 1. And then when he got to Parkland Hospital, he was given additional assignments, which included going to the Texas Theater in civilian clothing to witness or participate in Oswald's arrest. An analysis of the Dallas Police Department dictabelt recording of Channel 1 related to the assassination of President John F. Kennedy was done by these guys. And from that analysis, they produced this chart, which shows the RPMs of the interference motorcycle during a period of time of the recording. And from those RPMs, you can calculate the speed of the motorcycle, or you can estimate the speed of the motorcycle based upon the transmissions, the possible transmissions that could have been on the motorcycles. And from this, it was concluded that during that period where I have red boxed on the graph, the motorcycle was traveling at a relatively high speed. And if it was the three-wheel motorcycle, the Survey car, that relatively high speed would be in the area of 40 miles per hour or a little higher than that, which might be a reasonable speed for a three-wheel motorcycle to travel on the highway. And using that information, I have plotted this motorcycle's movement on this map here. And the pink area there with the S, that's where the Dallas Police Department receiver station was. So a motorcycle producing interference, moving at 40 miles per hour or thereabouts from number 1 to number 2 here, would produce interference at the receiver station and thereby interfere with the signal being recorded at the dispatch center. And then he would exit the highway at number 2 and go to Market Hall, and that's where we get the intermittent engine speeds after he exits the highway. So this matches up very well with my theory. So I think that Taylor, James H. Taylor, was riding that motorcycle on the Stemmons Highway, providing the radio interference that was calculated to interfere with the receiver station at the Stoneleigh Hotel, which I have circled in pink there, and thereby prevent, according to their plan anyway, to prevent the assassins' transmissions in Dealey Plaza from being recorded at the dispatch center. And then after the motorcade passed Market Hall, Taylor, on his three-wheel motorcycle, followed them to Parkland Hospital, where we see him standing next to the three-wheel motorcycle. And now I'm going to run through my proposed scenario for the actions of James H. Taylor on the day of the assassination. This is a photograph taken on Cedar Springs Road, Cedar Springs Road, early on in the motorcade, before the motorcade got downtown. And I've circled the officer there because I think this might be Taylor watching the motorcade early on before he went to Stemmons Highway. He's wearing a cap here, a white cap, which is typically what the three-wheel motorcycle riders wear, whereas the solo or the single motorcycle riders wear the helmet. Taylor is, by profession at this time, a single motorcycle rider, so he would normally wear a helmet. But if he was riding a three-wheel motorcycle, and early in the parade he might have been wearing the hat so as not to seem conspicuous. Anyway, I can't prove this is Taylor. And the color of the collar there, the big fluffy collar, does look a little grayer than it does in some other photography. But colors in photography will differ from photograph to photograph or from film to film. So I'm not worried by that. This isn't central to my theory, but I think he probably is this officer with a three-wheel motorcycle on Cedar Springs Road early in the motorcade, and then he made his way to the Stemmons Highway. And then, as I've already said, he provided the radio interference while traveling at a moderate speed on the Stemmons Highway, and then he exited the highway and went, and this I think was timed to cover the assassination, this period when he's on the highway providing the consistent interference. And then we get intermittent interference after that for a while as he's at Market Hall, or the Trade Mart as they call it. And on the recording we can hear the motorcade passes the open mic, and I think that's Taylor's open mic at the Trade Mart. And then after the motorcade passes, I think he follows the motorcade to Parkland Hospital, where we see him standing here with the three-wheel motorcycle. And I think we can see in this clip Taylor in Oak Cliff after Tippit was shot. He reaches his hand in what I presume to be Captain Westbrook's car. I came to that conclusion for reasons I don't recall now, but I think that's Captain Westbrook's car. And it looks to me like he reaches and puts something in there. So I'm speculating that he has received J.D. Tippit's gun, or the gun that was on J.D. Tippit when he was allegedly shot on 10th Street, the gun that Calloway and Scoggins took away from the scene. I think somehow that gun has got to James Taylor here, and that he's putting it in Captain Westbrook's car. That's very speculative, and I can't prove any of it. And this is how I identify these people. Not all of these are definite, but I'm pretty sure. I've got Captain Westbrook sitting in the back seat of his car. I've got William Alexander there walking towards this is the used furniture store or warehouse or whatever where they were going to search it because somebody said, or it was, what was his name? I forget his name right now, but somebody said that he thought the suspect went into this building here in Oak Cliff before the Texas Theater, before they get to the Texas Theater. And that's William Alexander walking towards that. And Sergeant Owens is there. I could identify him earlier in the film, and I could see his glasses. James H. Taylor reaching into Captain Westbrook's car. Right beside him looking on is Sergeant Gerald Hill, the most suspicious character that there ever was in the universe. That officer in the white hat, I don't know who that is. And then we've got what I think might be Jimmy Valentine there, who was supposed to be at the Texas School Book Depository at this time. But as I have gone over in other videos, nothing he says can be trusted. So that's who I think these people are. And this is from one frame of the film where I can see that this guy does have that unusual fur collar on his unusual leather jacket. So I think this is James Taylor. Though you can't be certain. I can't be certain from this, but I think it is. He's got the police stripe on his pants, and it looks like he's wearing the police helmet. So, contrary to the way he appears at the Texas Theater, it looks as though he's in police uniform here. So if this is Taylor, I think he changes into so-called civilian clothing before he enters the Texas Theater. I also think that before this, he might have been the alleged shooter involved in the alleged shooting allegedly of J.D. Tippit on 10th Street, because Taylor has black hair, and a couple of the witnesses said the shooter had black hair. And also because Gerald Hill on the radio identified the shells at the Tippit scene as having come from an automatic .38, and Taylor can be seen at Parkland Hospital to be packing an automatic pistol, as I judge that to indicate by looking at that. I'm not an expert on pistols. I don't know if it's a .38 or a .45 or what it is, but it definitely looks like an automatic. But I'm not committed to that. I'm not certain of that. That is, I'm not certain that Taylor was the shooter on 10th Street, but I thought I should mention that just in case. And then after that, as I've already said, I think he changed into civilian clothes and entered the Texas Theater because he knew Oswald was to be arrested there and he was going to be present for Oswald's arrest. And here we see him coming out, not in police uniform. And after that, he returns to Parkland Hospital, where he does crowd control, and where he is photographed, and where he sees that he's being photographed, and he's upset at being photographed because he doesn't want to be recognized as the same person coming out of the Texas Theater. And the Secret Service also is concerned. And from there, he goes with D.L. Jackson and escorts JFK's hearse to Parkland Hospital. He can be seen here on the way to Love Field, and of course there's a double exposure here that makes it hard to see the rider's face, but maybe that's intentional, who knows. And then we see him standing around at Love Field, and after this we lose track of James H. Taylor. Some people will object to the timing problem presented by this officer, Taylor, being at Parkland Hospital, being photographed there at certain times, which you can estimate based on various things in the photography. They will say that because Oswald was arrested at a certain time, that this officer couldn't have been at the Texas Theater because he's at Parkland Hospital. That's a very long, complicated story, and I'm not going to deal with that here, other than to say that I have gone through that. I don't think the timing is a problem, but that's its own video. I think I've made a video on that already. Maybe I'll make another one. I don't know. But I'm not going to deal with that here. I am satisfied that the timing issue is not a problem for my theory. Now, I want to finish up by getting back to the matter of the leather jacket. As I've already said, the guy that I identify as J.W. Williams, that Marion Baker identified as J.W. Williams, and the official storytellers say is H.B. McLain, this guy is not wearing a leather jacket. So the official story, H.B. McLain, is not wearing a leather jacket. And the running motorcycle officer in the Darnell film, I identify as H.B. McLain. So the guy that I identify as H.B. McLain, you can see, is not wearing a leather jacket. So nobody's H.B. McLain is wearing a leather jacket. And yet, in this photography, which I got at Bart Camp's website in 2018, H.B. McLain can be seen later in the day bringing the jacket to the Homicide and Robbery Bureau and putting it on the desk inside the office. He's never seen wearing it, but he is seen bringing it back to the police station. And then he stands guard outside the door, and you can see the jacket that he put on the desk inside the office behind him. So why, if H.B. McLain never wore this jacket, why is he bringing it back to the police station? I think this means that the jacket was planned to be a prop. It wasn't really or wasn't necessarily anybody's jacket in particular, but it was planned to be a prop so that Taylor could use the jacket to enter the Texas Theater as a civilian and exit as a policeman, where he could be wearing this jacket and he could play both roles because it's not specifically a policeman's jacket. And if he's not wearing other police clothing, as he wasn't when he entered the theater, then he could be mistaken for being a civilian, as they call the rest of us. But he can exit looking like a policeman. So this was part of the plan of the day, to have Taylor wearing that jacket, even though it may not even be his jacket. Maybe it is his jacket, I don't know. But then McLain brings it back to the police station, and maybe they wanted him to be photographed bringing it back to the police station, so that we can think, as the Sixth Floor Museum tells us, that this is McLain wearing the leather jacket at the Parkland Hospital, even though it's not McLain's face. How would we know it's not his face? I wouldn't have known until the photograph in Taylor's obituary appeared. I wouldn't have known that was Taylor. So nobody would have. Well, somebody would have known. People who knew the two officers would know who it is, but the general public would never know which officer this is that the Sixth Floor Museum says is McLain. And if McLain is seen bringing the jacket back to the police station, then we can assume that the Sixth Floor Museum is right, that this is McLain, and the public will never know that these are two different officers that are being associated with the jacket, you see. So I think it's part of the cover-up that McLain brings the jacket back to the police station, and that we see him with the jacket, and then the Sixth Floor Museum identifies him as the officer wearing the jacket at Parkland Hospital. I think that's all part of the cover-up, and reveals that this was a conspiracy, a plan. It was planned in advance for Taylor to be wearing that jacket so that he could do the job at the Texas Theater the way they wanted it done. Okay, that's the kind of conspiracy this was. The Dallas Police Department motorcyclists were doing all sorts of shenanigans in the service of the conspiracy to murder John Kennedy.